Elena Martinez had learned to smile through disrespect, because in a place like Harbor Diner, a smile was armor and silence was survival. The neon sign outside flickered like it was tired of pretending the city had hope, and the rain pressed against the windows with a steady anger that matched the ache in her feet. It was late graveyard shift when tips were thin and customers were either lonely, bitter, or looking for someone smaller than them to blame. Rick, the manager, kept barking orders like her name was a mistake. And every time Elena tried to breathe, he reminded her she was replaceable. She'd heard that word so many times, it had started to feel like a label stitched into her uniform. Still, she worked, because her mother needed medicine, and Elena needed tuition, and the world didn't pause just because a girl was trying her best. That night, though, something in the diner felt off, like the air had been holding a secret too long, and when Elena glanced toward the darkest booth in the far corner, she saw the reason. A boy sat alone in a miniature charcoal suit that looked tailored to perfection. Too expensive for this greasy place, his hair combed neat, his posture rigid like he'd been trained to sit still even when he wanted to run. He hadn't ordered food, only a glass of water that he didn't touch. His eyes gray and bright, like stormlight, kept snapping toward the door, and every time Elena took a step near him, he flinched as if kindness was another kind of threat. Elena's chest tightened because she recognized that flinch. It wasn't shyness. It was fear that had learned to hide inside manners. She poured coffee for a regular, ignored Rick's glare, and approached the boy softly, keeping her hands visible, her voice gentle. She offered hot chocolate on the house and asked if he was waiting for someone. The boy's lips parted, but no sound came out. His gaze slid past her shoulder to the entrance, and in that moment the bell above the door rang and a gust of wet cold rolled in with a man who smelled like cheap whiskey and trouble. Wade Tanner stumbled inside, laughing too loud, knocking over a display of ketchup bottles like the world was a joke only he understood. People in the diner went quiet the way they always did when Wade entered, because everyone knew what he was. A storm that looked for a target. Elena felt her stomach knot as Wade's eyes wandered, then landed on the boy in the suit. A sneer spread across his face, sharp and mean. He started mocking the child, calling him Little Prince, telling him to look up, telling him he didn't belong with real people. The boy shrank back, shoulders curling inward, hands rising to protect his face as if he'd practiced that move too many times. Rick vanished into the back like a coward, leaving Elena alone in the open. And Elena felt something hot rise in her throat. Anger, yes, but also a stubborn sense of right and wrong that the world hadn't managed to kill. She stepped forward and told Wade to stop, told him it was a kid, told him to go home and sleep it off. Wade turned toward her slowly, as if noticing her was an insult. He called her just a waitress, the words dripping with the kind of disrespect that wanted to erase her humanity. And then he grabbed a heavy glass sugar dispenser from the next table. Elena saw his arm pull back, saw the clumsy violence forming like a cruel decision, and she didn't think about her job, or her rent, or the way pain could change a life. She only saw the boy's terrified eyes and the glass arcing toward him. Elena moved. She threw herself across the booth, wrapping her arms around the child's head and curling her body over his like a shield. The impact hit her shoulder with a deft crack, glass shattering, pain exploding down her arm and up her neck like white fire. She gasped, the breath knocked out of her, but she didn't let go. Shards rained onto the table and floor, but the boy was protected under her body, and Elena forced her voice to stay steady as she whispered, "Don't move, okay? Stay down." The diner went silent except for Wade's heavy breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. Wade stumbled backward, already trying to blame her, already rehearsing lies that made him innocent. Then the silence changed. It wasn't only quiet, It was as if the air itself had stopped moving. The temperature dropped so fast, Elena felt it on her skin, colder than the rain outside. And the front door opened again, without the bell ringing. Just a soft click that sounded like a lock turning on the whole world. A man stepped in, tall and pale, wearing a black coat that seemed to swallow the diner's dim light. His face was coldly beautiful, sharp angles, flawless skin, eyes a deep violet that didn't belong to any human she'd ever seen, glowing with an ancient kind of life. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't ask what happened. He looked at the broken glass, then at Wade, then at Elena bleeding on the booth, and the room filled with a pressure that made even Wade's drunken swagger falter. The boy wriggled free from beneath Elena's arm, stumbling toward the stranger as if his body knew safety before his mind did, and his voice finally broke through the fear. "Papa," the boy whispered, and Elena's heart sank with a sudden understanding that hit harder than the glass had. This wasn't just a rich father. This was something else. The man placed a pale hand on the boy's head, protective and possessive in the same motion. Then his violet eyes settled on Elena, and she felt like she'd stepped into the gaze of a predator who was deciding whether she was prey or proof. "You are injured," he said, his voice calm and low, not unkind but not soft either. Elena swallowed, clutching her shoulder, trying to stand even as the room spun. "I'm fine," she lied, because that's what poor girls always did when pain threatened to make them look weak. "Just get him out of here." Wade opened his mouth to protest, to laugh, to talk his way out, but the man turned his head toward him slowly, and the entire diner understood that whatever happened next would not be decided by police or fists or loud voices. It would be decided by a king who had just watched a human girl bleed to protect his son, and for the first time in a long time. Elena saw fear in the eyes of the man who thought he owned the room. Asterisk Elena expected to wake up in her tiny apartment with the sound of traffic outside and the smell of cheap detergent in the air. But instead she opened her eyes to silence, so deep it felt expensive. The ceiling above her was high and shadowed, a chandelier casting soft golden light across dark wooden walls, and the bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever touched. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, until a sharp pull of pain in her shoulder reminded her that glass and gravity had been very real. She tried to sit up and noticed clean white bandages wrapped carefully around her arm, far more professional than anything an emergency clinic would have done. A soft voice from across the room told her to move slowly, and she turned to see an older man in a tailored suit standing near a fireplace, his silver hair neat, his posture straight. He introduced himself as Dr. Harlan Thorne and calmly explained that she had lost blood but would recover fully. Elena's first question was not about herself. "The boy," she said quickly, her throat dry. "Is he okay?" The doctor's expression softened slightly. "Julian is unharmed," he replied. "He has been waiting outside your door for hours." Relief washed over her so fast it almost made her dizzy again. Before she could ask another question, the heavy wooden door opened without a sound, and the man from the diner stepped inside. Without the storm and flashing neon, he looked even more unreal tall, composed, dressed in a crisp black suit that fit him perfectly, his pale skin flawless and his violet eyes steady and unreadable. The room felt colder the second he entered, not from temperature, but from presence. "You are awake," he said, his voice calm and controlled. Elena pushed herself upright, despite the ache in her shoulder, refusing to appear fragile. "Your son," she said again, as if that was the only thing that mattered. A faint shift crossed his face, almost surprise. "Julian is safe," he answered. "Because of you." He stepped closer, and she realized that this man did not move like ordinary people. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. "My name is Adrian Volkov," he said, and the name carried weight like a title. Elena recognized it instantly. Volkov Industries, Volkov Holdings, the billionaire whose companies owned half the city skyline. But money alone did not explain what she had seen in his eyes. Adrian studied her carefully. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "You risked your life for a child you did not know." Elena swallowed and met his gaze. "Because he was scared," she said simply. "And no one else was going to help him." Adrian did not blink. "Most people choose safety," he replied. "Most people look away." Elena gave a tired smile. "Then most people are wrong." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, Adrian placed a tablet on the bedside table and tapped the screen. An image appeared, grainy footage from the diner, Elena bleeding over Julian, already circulating online. Headlines called her heroic, reckless, dramatic. Her name was everywhere. Her stomach tightened. "This will fade," she said uncertainly. Adrian's expression darkened. "It will not." He corrected. "The men who oppose me saw this. They now believe you are important." Elena felt confusion turn into fear. "Important how?" she asked. Adrian's voice remained steady, but something dangerous flickered beneath it. "They will assume I value you," he said. "And anything I value becomes a target." The room suddenly felt smaller. "So what happens now?" she whispered. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. "You cannot return to your apartment," he said. "It would not be safe. My enemies would use you to reach my son." Elena's pride flared despite the situation. "I don't need charity," she said firmly. "I didn't protect him for money or protection." Adrian's eyes sharpened, not offended but assessing. "This is not charity," he replied. "It is responsibility. I owe you a debt." He paused before continuing. "I am offering you a position here at the estate. Julian trusts you. He needs someone who treats him like a child, not an heir." Elena hesitated, the idea overwhelming. Live in a mansion owned by a billionaire who might be something far more than human. It sounded like a fairy tale written by someone who did not understand danger. "And if I refuse?" she asked carefully. Adrian held her gaze without wavering. "Then I will arrange for you to disappear to a secure location," he said. "But Julian will not understand why you left." Elena thought of the boy's trembling hands, the way he had whispered, "Papa," like a lifeline. Her voice softened. "If I stay with dignity," she said. "I finish my nursing degree. I'm not treated like a servant. And I make my own choices." Adrian regarded her for a long moment, and then slowly he inclined his head. It was not a nod of casual agreement. It felt like a king accepting terms. "Agreed," he said quietly. And as the door opened and Julian rushed in to hug her carefully around the waist, Elena realized her life had shifted forever, not because she had been rescued, but because she had stepped into a world where kindness had consequences. And the vampire king had decided she was worth protecting. Asterisk life inside Volkov estate felt like stepping into a world that existed between history and shadow. A place where silence carried more weight than words, and every corridor seemed to remember secrets older than the city itself. Elena quickly learned that beauty did not always mean warmth. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and tall windows overlooked endless dark forests. Yet the air inside remained cool and restrained, as if emotion itself had rules here. The staff moved quietly, rarely making eye contact with her, and though they were polite, she sensed their quiet judgment. To them she was temporary, human, fragile, an unexpected variable in a carefully controlled kingdom. But Julian did not treat her that way. From the moment she was allowed to leave her room, he followed her with cautious hope. asking small questions about ordinary life, what school buses looked like, whether people really ate ice cream in the park, whether friends laughed loudly without fear. Elena answered honestly, never exaggerating, never hiding hardship, but always showing him that simple things could still hold joy. She noticed that Adrian watched from a distance more often than he spoke. Sometimes she would feel his presence before she saw him, like a shift in pressure in the air, and when she turned, he would be standing in a doorway or on a balcony above, observing quietly as Julian smiled more freely in her company. There was something deeply restrained about him, as if he wanted to step closer, but believed he did not deserve to. One afternoon, determined to break the heavy atmosphere, Elena convinced Julian to explore the old greenhouse at the edge of the estate grounds. The structure had once been magnificent, but now stood neglected, its glass dusty, its plants long dead. Elena rolled up her sleeves despite the lingering ache in her shoulder and announced they were starting something new. They planted seeds together, their hands sinking into soil, and Julian laughed when Elena accidentally smeared dirt across her own cheek. The sound of his laughter echoed brightly, cutting through the estate's gloom like sunlight through storm clouds. High above them, Adrian stood on a stone balcony, his expression unreadable, but his posture rigid. He had not heard his son laugh like that in years, not since tragedy had hardened his heart into something colder than stone. That evening, Elena found Adrian in the vast library, surrounded by towering shelves and ancient books written in languages she could not recognize. He looked less like a businessman there, and more like a ruler guarding knowledge older than nations. He was happy today, she said carefully. Adrian's eyes lifted from the page he had not been reading. He is often content, he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Elena stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. Content is not the same as happy, she said. He needs you with him, not just protecting him from a distance. For a moment, the room seemed to grow colder, but Adrian did not lash out. Instead, he looked almost conflicted. My world is dangerous, he said quietly. Everything I touch becomes marked. Elena held his gaze without fear. Then teach him how to survive it, she answered. Don't teach him to hide from it. Something flickered in Adrian's violet eyes, something softer than authority. He stepped closer, close enough that Elena could feel the unnatural coolness radiating from him, and gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a strange warmth through her chest. You are not afraid of me, he observed. Elena considered the truth. I was, she admitted. But monsters don't worry about their children's laughter. The words hung between them, honest and bold. Adrian's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. Before either could speak again, a guard hurried into the library, whispering urgently about unusual movement detected beyond the estate gates. Adrian's expression shifted instantly, a softness replaced by sharp focus. He moved toward the window and stared into the forest darkness, his gaze intense. Elena followed his line of sight and saw nothing but trees swaying in the wind, yet she felt the tension ripple through him. They are watching, he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena did not ask who they were, but she understood one thing clearly. Stepping into this world had not only changed her life, it had placed her directly in the center of a power struggle far greater than she had imagined. And as Adrian turned back toward her, protective instinct blazing behind controlled composure, she realized that whatever threat lingered beyond those gates, he would face it first, but he would no longer face it alone. The warning did not come with thunder or explosions. It came with silence so complete that even the wind seemed to hesitate beyond the iron gates of Volkov estate. Elena felt it before she understood it, a strange tightness in the air that made the back of her neck prickle as she walked Julian back from the greenhouse. The guards along the perimeter, were more alert than usual, their movements sharper, their whispers shorter. Adrian had been distant all day, pacing through corridors with quiet intensity, taking calls in languages Elena did not recognize. That evening, as dusk bled into night, the estate lights flickered once, then steadied, and Julian's small hand tightened around hers. "Papa looks worried," he murmured, trying to sound brave. Elena knelt in front of him and brushed his hair back gently. "Your father protects what he loves," she said. "Sometimes that means he sees danger before we do." She barely finished the sentence when the main doors of the estate shook violently, not from an explosion, but from a powerful impact that echoed through the stone walls. Julian flinched, and Elena's heart pounded, yet she did not allow fear to freeze her. Guards rushed down the hallway, voices urgent but controlled, and somewhere in the distance she heard Adrian's voice give a single calm command that carried absolute authority. "Inside," he ordered. "Lock the inner halls." Elena did not wait to be told twice. She pulled Julian toward the library, remembering Adrian once mentioning a reinforced chamber hidden behind one of the bookshelves. The lights dimmed briefly as another heavy impact struck the outer gates, and for a moment the estate felt less like a home and more like a fortress under siege. Julian's breathing quickened, but Elena kept her tone steady. "Remember our game?" she whispered. "The brave knight protects the prince." Julian managed a shaky nod. They reached the library just as a masked figure appeared at the far end of the corridor, dressed in dark tactical gear, moving with deliberate purpose. The intruder saw them and advanced quickly, confident, assuming the human girl would panic. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears, yet her grip on Julian never loosened. She guided him toward the hidden mechanism and pushed him gently behind the sliding bookshelf panel that revealed a secure steel lined room. "Stay inside until your father comes," she instructed firmly, closing the door halfway before turning back to face the threat. The intruder stepped closer, voice distorted behind the mask, mocking her bravery and telling her to move aside. Elena felt fear surge through her body, but she stood her ground. "You won't touch him," she said, surprising even herself with the steadiness in her voice. The intruder reached forward, but before he could grab her, a blur of motion cut through the hallway like a living shadow. Adrian appeared between them without warning, his presence overwhelming and powerful in a way that defied explanation. His eyes were no longer simply violet. They glowed with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural, and the air around him felt charged. He did not shout or threaten. He simply looked at the masked man, and the confidence drained from the intruder's posture. In one swift, controlled movement, Adrian disarmed him and sent him crashing backward against the wall, not with wild violence, but with precise dominance that made clear who ruled this territory. Other guards rushed in, securing the hallway and escorting the intruder away. Silence returned slowly, heavy and tense. Adrian turned to Elena, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath his composure, not just anger, but fear. "I told you to stay back during danger," he said quietly, not accusing but shaken. Elena lifted her chin, despite her racing heart. "And let them take your son?" She replied, "That's not who I am." Adrian stepped closer, examining her as if seeing her differently now. She was trembling slightly, but she had not run. He reached out, hesitating only a second before placing his cool hand over hers. "You continue to risk yourself for us," he said, voice low. "Why?" Elena held his gaze without wavering. "Because someone once risked themselves for me," she answered softly. "And it saved my life." The words settled between them like truth neither could deny. From inside the hidden chamber, Julian called out nervously, and Elena immediately moved to open it, kneeling to reassure him. Adrian watched her crouch to embrace his son, speaking gently until the child's fear faded and something inside him shifted permanently. The attack had not been random. It was a message from enemies who believed humans were weak and easily broken. Yet Elena had stood firm without power, without weapons, armed only with courage. As guards secured the estate and the threat retreated into the darkness beyond the gates, Adrian understood that protecting Elena was no longer about debt or obligation. It was about choice. She had chosen his family without hesitation, and in that moment, the Vampire King silently chose her in return. The attack on the estate did not end the tension. It transformed it into something sharper and more public, because within 2 days, an invitation arrived sealed in black wax, bearing a crest. Elena did not recognize, but Adrian clearly did. The midnight solstice gala, hosted by the Crimson Circle, was presented as a gesture of unity among powerful families, yet Adrian's jaw tightened the moment he read the card. Elena understood enough by now to know this was not a celebration, but a test. Refusing the invitation would signal weakness, but attending meant stepping directly into the sightline of enemies who had already tried to breach his home. Adrian intended to go alone, insisting that she remain behind the estate's walls, but Elena refused calmly and firmly, reminding him that hiding had not prevented danger before. "They already know I matter," she said. "Let them see I am not afraid." Adrian studied her for a long moment before finally agreeing under strict conditions that she would not leave his side. The night of the gala arrived cloaked in fog that curled along the city streets like something alive, and Elena found a deep midnight blue gown waiting in her room, elegant and powerful without being excessive. When she stepped into the grand entrance hall, Adrian stood waiting in a tailored black suit, a subtle silver emblem pinned to his lapel. His gaze lingered on her not with possession, but with quiet awe, and for a brief second the world beyond them felt irrelevant. The ballroom of the Elysium Hotel shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble, but beneath the beauty was a tension that hummed like distant electricity. Conversations faded as they entered, and Elena felt hundreds of eyes assessing her, curious, judgmental, calculating. She recognized instantly that many in the room did not consider her equal. A noblewoman in crimson silk made a pointed remark about temporary companions, her smile thin and dismissive, while another guest murmured that humans rarely lasted long in immortal circles. Elena felt the sting of humiliation rise, but refused to let it show. Instead, she lifted her chin and responded with measured dignity, speaking of loyalty and courage as strengths no bloodline could guarantee. Her composure unsettled more than one critic, and Adrian's presence beside her remained steady and unyielding. At the center of the ballroom stood an ancient relic encased in glass, a silver chalice etched with symbols that seemed older than language. It was said to react only to those with royal destiny, though Elena dismissed the story as myth until a council member invited guests to approach it ceremonially. When Elena stepped closer out of curiosity, the air around the chalice seemed to vibrate faintly. She did not touch it intentionally. Her fingers brushed the edge of the glass case, and for a brief heartbeat, the etched symbols shimmered with pale light. A hush rippled through the crowd. Adrian's eyes narrowed sharply, not in anger but in concern, while whispers spread quickly across the room. Lord Cyrus Vane, the leader of the Crimson Circle, smiled from across the floor, his expression calculating. "Interesting," he said smoothly, approaching them. "It appears the relic acknowledges more than noble blood." His tone carried both fascination and warning. Elena stepped back instinctively, unsettled by the attention, but refusing to appear frightened. Adrian moved subtly closer, placing himself between her and Cyrus without making a scene. The moment passed, and the glow faded, yet the impact lingered in every gaze that followed them afterward. What had been mockery transformed into speculation, and speculation into something far more dangerous. Curiosity about why a simple waitress could trigger a relic tied to ancient vampire lineage. As the night progressed, Elena endured whispered comments and veiled threats disguised as compliments. But she responded each time with quiet strength, refusing to shrink beneath scrutiny. Adrian spoke little, yet his protective stance never faltered, and more than once his eyes met hers with a silent acknowledgement that she had handled herself with remarkable courage. When the final toast was raised, Cyrus lifted his glass and declared that alliances would soon be tested and loyalty revealed, his gaze locking deliberately on Elena as he spoke. The message was clear. She had become part of a political game far larger than herself. As Adrian guided her out of the ballroom, pension trailing behind them like a shadow, Elena realized the gala had accomplished exactly what it intended. It had exposed her not as weak or disposable, but as significant. And in a world where power thrived on perception, significance was both a weapon and a threat. Asterisk. The drive back from the gala was quiet, but the silence between Elena and Adrian was not empty. It was heavy with understanding that something irreversible had happened. The relic's reaction had shifted the balance of power in a room filled with immortals who believed destiny belonged only to bloodlines centuries old. By morning, the consequences arrived. News spread through hidden networks that Lord Cyrus Vane intended to secure the human girl for questioning, claiming her presence posed a risk to vampire order. Adrian read the message without visible emotion, but the air around him felt colder than ever. Elena stood across from his desk, refusing to tremble even as the meaning settled in. "They want to use me against you," she said quietly. Adrian's gaze lifted, intense and unwavering. "They will not touch you," he replied, but there was something fierce beneath the calm that revealed how personal the threat had become. Before further plans could be made, alarms echoed faintly through the estate grounds, not a chaotic breach like before, but a strategic distraction. Guards rushed to outer perimeters, while a small, precise team infiltrated through a concealed service entrance known only to a few insiders. It was not random. It was calculated betrayal. Elena was in Julian's study room when the power flickered, and though fear struck her chest, she reacted quickly, guiding Julian toward the reinforced chamber once more. This time she did not wait outside. She locked the door behind them and activated the internal alarm system Adrian had shown her days earlier, proving she had listened carefully to every precaution. Footsteps approached, deliberate and confident, and a voice outside the steel door spoke smoothly, claiming they came for negotiation. Elena recognized the deception instantly. "We are not opening it," she said firmly to Julian, keeping her voice steady. The lock began to strain under external force, and she understood the time was measured in seconds. Suddenly, the corridor outside erupted in controlled chaos, not wild violence, but swift dominance. Adrian's presence arrived like a storm restrained within human shape, and commands were issued with lethal precision. The attackers were disarmed and detained within moments, their plan exposed as a desperate attempt to seize leverage before the council could convene. When the door finally opened, Adrian stood there, composed yet visibly shaken by the proximity of danger. His eyes scanned Elena first, then Julian, and relief flickered briefly before discipline returned. "You followed protocol," he said, voice low. Elena met his gaze. "You taught me well," she answered. Later that evening, the Vampire Council was forced into emergency session. Evidence of Cyrus's unauthorized assault was undeniable, and Adrian presented it without dramatic flourish, relying on facts and witnesses rather than fury. Cyrus attempted to argue that Elena's involvement threatened ancient traditions, but his claim unraveled when council members acknowledged that the relic had responded of its own will, not manipulation. By the end of the session, Cyrus was stripped of influence and placed under strict surveillance, his authority fractured by his own impatience. Justice was not loud or theatrical. It was final and absolute. Back at the estate, calm returned gradually, though the atmosphere felt different, now less guarded, more honest. Elena stood on the balcony, overlooking the forest when Adrian joined her, the night air cool, but no longer oppressive. "You could have left," he said quietly. "Many would have chosen safety." Elena smiled faintly. "Safety without respect isn't freedom," she replied. Adrian studied her, the centuries of isolation in his expression softening. "You were never a weakness," he admitted. "You were a reminder that power without compassion becomes tyranny." The confession carried more weight than any grand declaration. He extended his hand, not as a command, but as an invitation. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as debt, not as protection, as my equal." Elena placed her hand in his, feeling the cool strength that no longer intimidated her. "I will stay," she answered, "but not because you saved me." Adrian's brow lifted slightly. "Why, then?" She held his gaze with steady warmth. "Because we chose each other." Behind them, Julian's laughter drifted through the open doors, bright and unafraid. And for the first time, the estate felt less like a fortress and more like a home rebuilt on trust rather than fear. In that quiet moment, the Vampire King understood that true strength was not dominance over enemies, but the courage to honor a human heart that had stood unbroken beside him.